morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Good morning and welcome to Gainesville. We are so thrilled that you're all here, and we are committed to making it worth your while. I'm Diane McFarland, and I'm Dean of the College of Journalism and Communications. We are one of the 3 partners in Journalism Interactive. And we are just really excited to be hosting this event this year. This is our second time to host it in the 5 years that Journalism Interactive has been in existence. I have to tell you on a personal note, I am so happy to be a member of your tribe. This is a group that is not only comfortable with change, but leading change. And when you look at the schools who are represented here, you see the ones who are doing the most innovative things. And I believe, particularly since I had nothing to do with the institution of this event, but I believe this has a lot to do with many of the things that you're doing that are most innovative in journalism education today. So in addition to welcoming you to Gainesville and to Journalism Interactive, I'm also welcoming you to Super Week. Now, Super Week really is super. We are involved with hosting 5 events this week. This is one of the headliner events. The other one is Frank. And Frank is really an international gathering of social change communicators. These are professionals who use strategic communication to drive positive social change. We had over 300 people. Actually, they're still here. This will end at lunch today, but more than 300 people came to Gainesville for this conference. It is in its 3rd year, and it continues to grow. And we're really excited about this program. We have the only endowed chair in public interest communications in the country, and it's a program that we're committed to and will continue to build. In addition to Frank, we have Frank Scholar. We are adding a research component to public interest communications, and that group has been here most of the week, and then their meeting will be tomorrow. Changeville is a brand new event that has crossed over both, and I hope some of you were able to attend last night. This is really about artists who are using their work to drive positive social change, and it is a means of deepening community engagement, and we are very, very pleased by the response that we've gotten from the community, both the artists themselves and the audience. So downtown Gainesville has literally been vibrating from the energy of all of this. We have been headquartered at the Hippodrome. You will be there, is it later today, Matt? At the Hippodrome, and using local venues for our meetings. So this has just been pervasive in the community this week, and everyone has been very enthusiastically in support of it. For me, it's also kind of been Goosebump Week. You know that rush you get when you hear something that is truly revelatory, or you're touched to the core by something somebody says that is so meaningful, or you look around you in wonderment at the level of involvement and real commitment to a particular cause, and whether it's public interest communications or journalism education. So that's what I have experienced this week, and I'm very hopeful that you have the same feeling as we put an exclamation on this week with the Journalism Interactive program. So I want to do some thank yous. As I mentioned, this is Journalism Interactive's 5th conference, and the 2nd one we've hosted here. In fact, I've been dean for about 5 minutes when I attended our first Journalism Interactive, and it was so reinforcing to me. I knew that I had come to the right place. I want to extend particular thanks to our partner schools in the JI Consortium. The University of Maryland, which was the founding college that started this program, and the University of Missouri. Linda Kraxberger, Associate Dean of Missouri, is here. Linda, where are you? Thank you so much for coming. And Sean Mussenden in the back is University of Maryland. Thank you, Sean. Both of them were present at the birth. And please thank your deans for us, Dean Dave Kirpius and Lucy Douglas. Thank you so much. I also want to issue a very heartfelt and enthusiastic thanks to the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. They have committed a great deal of support to this conference. We were sort of biting our fingernails because it looked like there was going to be a need to find additional funding, and Jennifer Preston responded immediately when she heard about what it is you're doing, and the fact that Knight actually was involved very early on with this program and has played a key role programmatically. Karen Runlet is here. Karen is the new program director for journalism education for Knight. Karen, would you, everybody see you? Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Also here this week is Andrew Sherry, who is Vice President of Communications for Knight. He's been very involved with the Frank Conference, and I'm hopeful we'll be able to join us later. I also want to extend thanks to my colleagues who I admire and appreciate so much for what they've done with this, starting with Matt Sheehan, who has been the director of this program on behalf of our college. Matt was a part of the original team that created Journalism Interactive, and he has been so key to making it stronger year in and year out. Matt, you've worked so hard for this. Thank you. Really appreciate all your efforts. Matt also has been a hero with Frank. I won't go into the details, but trust me, he's saved the day several times. Ellen O'Dean is not here. She's been the project manager, really hardworking. I want to thank the whole national team who have been so supportive and involved. Mindy McAdams, who is our Knight chair, and you all know Mindy. She has been a presence on social media and talking about what we need to do to educate our students in the digital age. She was an early voice, and Mindy, we're very proud to have you on our faculty. Also our student volunteers. There's literally been an army. We've had 200 student volunteers involved with Super Week. So there have been 3 prevailing themes so far with Frank and Changeville. That's storytelling, community engagement, and change. And all 3 are a great segue to what you have on your agenda for this program, with an overlay of innovation. And I think that is the key component for this group, is how can we innovate to best prepare our students for the future. And so much great work has been done by so many of you in this room. As you can see from the program in your passport, and I assume you all have your passports, and if you've downloaded our digital program, we have 2 very full days planned for you. 2 days of quick fire presentations, a keynote, the Student Innovation Showcase, 2 longer discussions on VR and analytics, and of course capping it all off with the hands-on training on Saturday afternoon. JI is also purposely kept small. So there are just over 100 of you here for this conference. We designed it in this way so that you're able to have one-on-one and small group conversations that advance the national discourse about how our schools are training the next generation of storytellers. In just a few moments, we'll start our keynote presentation, but first a few more programmatic notes. After lunch this afternoon, we'll meet back on the main stage of the Hippodrome for our inaugural Big Think session. This is a blend of the Teach-a-thon and TED-style discussions on important trends and topics affecting our industries. You can't miss the Hippodrome. It's a Gothic-style building right at the end of Second Street, and just a couple of blocks from here. You'll find your lunch ticket and your passport on page 12. Tonight, we do hope you'll join us at the Woolley for our evening reception, which is sponsored by the Online News Association. You'll find beverage and coffee vouchers for that in your passport as well. And we hope that while you're here, you'll take advantage of our lovely city, and particularly this unique downtown. Gainesville is proud of the vibrant blend of college town, art community, and sports mecca. You can find a volunteer, staffer, or attendee with a UF button, and they'll be happy to offer recommendations. And so now, our keynote. We are very pleased to welcome back to Gainesville and Journalism Interactive, Matt Baji, who is Executive Director of the New York Times R&D Lab. Matt is a 5-year veteran of the lab, which is tasked with describing the future of media and media distribution. I just had a brief conversation with Matt, and I observed to him that as an alumna of the New York Times Company, I'm so proud of their level of innovation. They've truly been a leader in the media sphere and are demonstrating how media companies can adapt and thrive into the future, and Matt and the R&D team have played a very central role in that. Matt researches and develops views on media production and consumption, identifies trends worth further study, shapes prototypes and new applications developed by the lab, and works with his team and others across the Times to push out new ways of storytelling. Before joining the Times, Matt was a senior manager at Accenture in the Media and Entertainment Division. Today, we are pleased to hear him speak on the hits and misses of the lab, tips for starting your own innovation capacity, and he'll give us a sneak peek into what the lab sees coming in the next few years. Matt, thanks so much for coming back.
Thank you, Diane. That is... So it works. That's good. Woke you all up. Yeah, I'm very pleased to be back here. As Diane mentioned, I spoke at Journalism Interactive back in 2013. Last time I was here, it was the evening, and you all had glasses of wine, and so this was a much easier job. You're laughing, that's good. Okay, good. For those of you who haven't had an opportunity to see it, the lab at the Times is sort of a unique and interesting place. We are in our 11th year, so we're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. We got started back in 2006. So what I wanted to do today was to show you a little bit about what we've done over that time, how we work, and hopefully give you a few tips and pointers on how you can start a very similar kind of an innovation capacity within the organization that you work at. If you haven't been there, Matt, I just lost the host. Can you help me with that? Oh, okay. I don't have the thing. Really perfect timing for that. Like, all ready to go, hit the button, and
All right, sorry.
how are you all doing today? I don't know, I watched the debate last night.
Yes, yeah.
My favorite part about that was the screenshot that someone was tweeting about the closed captioning, just unintelligible yelling. The tweet was basically like, I'm not going to say that the CNN closed captioner has just lost the will to live, but clearly the CNN closed captioner has just lost the will to live.
Right. Oh my God. Did you make it through the whole thing?
No, I didn't make it through the whole thing. I watched the first hour. I was actually just rehearsing a little bit, and then was very hungry, and so I went and got a calzone, which worked out pretty well for me, as opposed to watching the other hour of this.
Restore sanity, eat a calzone.
Yeah, exactly. Matt's got something in the clamshell now. I'm not looking good about that.
For you?
Okay.
Fix this? Will that work?
So yeah, I should just like make a gesture at you as though you're my clicker. All right, we can do that. No problem at all. So yeah, for those of you who haven't seen it, this is one half of the lab. There are 7 of us. Each of us comes with a bit of a coding experience, but has a very different and diverse background that comes behind that. So you have data scientists, you have game designers, you have people who work in very traditional sort of design practices, you have people who work in physical computing. And then on the other side of that, he's not paying attention, that kind of fails it. On the other side of that is our exhibit space. Here we bring advertisers, agencies, people throughout the company through the space to take a look at some of the exhibits that we've built. This is just one of the different outputs that we have and one of the different pieces of value that we try to give back to the company. And we'll go through a little bit of the different aspects of an R&D group or an innovation group that might be valuable to you. So go ahead again, because I don't remember there. This is our mission. It's been the same since our founding back in 2006. The company around us has changed a lot. If you remember back 10 years ago, there was the Boston Globe, the regional newspaper group, About.com, all members of the Times community and Times company. And since then, we've focused down on the Times brand itself. In that, that's where we are, that's what we're about. And what that's allowed us to do is to focus a lot more on integrating directly within the, thank you, that doesn't ring at all. Integrate directly within the community of developers and technologists who work within the Times.
Get your notes out.
I could do with that, yeah, okay, good. So, as I said, we're about, this works now, hey, we're about 10 years in. And as I was putting together this talk, I realized, I don't know how long you all have been in the industry. Some of you for a while, some of you are students, so not that long. The last 10 years can be best described as a hellish landscape of change. It is unbelievable what we have all been through in the course of just the last decade. To give you an idea of what that looks like, this was the article that the Times published announcing the hiring of our Vice President of Research and Development Operations, which is a weird thing to call it. Ran back on December 9th, 2005. He started back in January, and it was published to much fanfare, as you might imagine. We don't report on ourselves very well, put it that way. And if you think about that time, does anybody remember what your phone looked like in late 2005, early 2006? Or maybe what you were like lusting after, like the key device? It was probably something like this. This is the Trio 680. It came out in the fall of 2006, and this was the new hotness. This was pretty great. So when we got started, that first act of work that we worked on was really around devices. It was clear that there was about to be a lot of movement, a lot of shift around the things that people were reading news on. And so that was really the first thing that we got into. And I think as you look at innovation labs and innovation communities throughout our industry, there's still a lot of focus here, and perhaps for good reason. So one of the first things we did was to develop the Times' messaging platform. This was all of our breaking news alerts and SMSs. You could ask to follow a columnist and get links to your phone when they had a new article put up. As you can see, this began back in August 2006. And we actually ran that SMS platform for the company well into 2012. Then, January 2007, suddenly everything shifted a little bit. Steve Jobs got on stage and introduced us all to the iPhone. It came out later that summer. Following that, the Kindle was announced that fall. It was launched in November, and it was completely back-ordered for another 5 months. You could barely get your hands on one of these things. And so that was where a lot of our focus initially went, this sort of Cambrian explosion of devices, of tablets, of tiny little PCs, nobody really knowing what was going to win and what was going to work out. We were trying to shove as much content onto these screens as we could. Here's a shot of Nick Bilton working on one of our earlier prototypes with a very janky-looking developer console for an e-reader. Now, along with this, there came the implications of, what else does this harbor? What else do we see coming? What else do we think this is going to be a harbinger of? And so in late 2007, we published this document, Ubiquitous Computing Vision. Does everybody remember UbiComp? That was like the big deal for a while. This was the idea that instead of a computing session, instead of sitting down at a machine and doing something for a while and then walking away, computing would be a pervasive force in our lives. So, nailed it. Some key Some key ideas that went into that document that we still wrestle with today are these of the disappearing computer. That is, that it isn't going to be a single device that you necessarily compute with. There'll be lots of different ones that you carry with you. There will be objects that can gather data from their environment and that can be computing in very specific and bespoke ways. The content and information will be disaggregated across all these different endpoints so that a story isn't necessarily a story, but it's also the data that underlies it. The dominance of push, that you won't necessarily be looking out for an article, but you'll be presented with that article from some stream-based system, perhaps. And this idea of ambient participation, that just by being in a place or being near a thing, you might be a data point on someone else's chart, which is kind of an interesting point. We're going to come back to each one of these as we go through, but I think you can see that it's a pretty prescient document. And now from that, I'm going to go ahead and play that. From that, we started building some prototypes. This is Mike Young. There should be some audio on this.
You'll see this blue panel drop down from the top, so it's the devices that I'm near that I'm connected to. And you'll see a little TV icon pop up there. So if I just drag George up to the TV and drop him there, the video will start to play on the TV.
Little George Clooney for your morning. This was one of the first times that we really started putting together these demonstrations and bringing people through a sort of vision of the future. This was sort of our living room example. The entire Custom Times program was a few more other demos that went along the same themes, and it won a Knight Batten Award back in 2009. I will point out, just for technology's sake, that what we just did there was about a year and a half before AirPlay came out. So anticipating a lot of these sort of shifts of moving content from device to device. Then the iPad came. And I think as an industry, we all perhaps wrongly breathed a giant sigh of relief. Like, we know this. We can put really pretty imagery on a thing now. It's almost like a paper, but it's digital. It looks exactly like that Knight Ridder video that we all watched back in 2002. Oh, this is great. Didn't quite work out that way. What we did do, though, is to keep finding different ways to take the content we had already made and the workflows that we already had and try to repurpose them for the devices that were now available. We were there too. This is Jennifer Brook, Adam Kaplan, the developer in the back, and Martin Niesenholz up front, presenting the Times' iPad app at that same event. Incidentally, for those of you who are interested in this sort of thing, in doing the research for this talk, Jennifer Brook was the third woman ever on an Apple stage in 2010. I'm just going to leave that there for a second. It's shameful. And we started looking at other surfaces too. This is the Microsoft Surface. We built a newsreader for it, imagining what news on your table might look like. We started shoving things into things that didn't even have screens. This is our Mirror example of news and clips in the morning, first thing in the morning. And after a little while, it seems like the industry has sort of bedded down on this idea that flat slabs of black glass are going to be the thing that we read on. And so, about this time, we looked at this chart. I actually used this slide last time I was here, if you remember. Points if you do. We looked at this landscape, and it was a little bit like Plutarch and Alexander. We wept because we had no more worlds to conquer. And that was sort of the end of that first act. Devices. Devices were an important thing. Along the way, though, we started looking at some of these other trends that were just starting to peek up from underground. Remember 2006 being that hellish landscape of a year? Two other huge things happened in 2006. Back on March 21st, Jack tweeted. He was just setting up my Twitter. And that opened to the public in July. And later and we got on there in January, so good for us. And then later that fall, Facebook finally became available to anybody with a valid email address. There's a lot of, it's really funny if you go back and read this blog post, there's a lot in here about maintaining privacy. That if you are at a university, you can only join the university groups if you have the right domain. If you're a corporate group, you can only join your corporate groups if you have the right domain. Very different set of language that they used back in 2006. But what this pointed to was this shift that maybe we weren't going to be the only place people got our news anymore. Maybe people were going to be sharing it in different ways and reading it in different ways that we didn't expect. So one of the other first things that I don't have a screenshot of, one of the first projects we did in R&D was to build a news quiz for Facebook, which was kind of an interesting project in itself. In terms of our thought leadership, though, we started giving this talk where we talked about taking that idea of the dominance of push media and moving it to a much more forefront of the idea. Here, the old paradigm, information is at the center, everyone comes to your website, they seek it out from you, you use one device, it's a web of pages. And what we were seeing a move toward was this paradigm of people at the center, information finding them across many different devices, across streams, in a much more real-time way, with a web of not just pages, but a web of data. Moving from browsing these static documents to tapping into streams of messages, the thing that I think feels pretty right about now. Along with those ideas, we developed a concept for an application called News.me. The idea here was to stream content from a variety of different sources, aggregate the view of a conversation about something, and provide an elegant in-app reading experience, much like Flipboard eventually did, specifically for the iPad. And what's interesting about the date on here, you'll notice it's the year before the iPad came out. This was in anticipation of much of that work happening. We also wanted to take a look at how data would be applied to our website. So this was, again, in 2009. You'll see this mock-up having a couple of charts over on the right. We're looking at the number of page views and clicks that this page is getting on the page itself. The number of referring sites, who's sending us the most traffic, what kind of conversation is happening on Twitter or Facebook around this article. And we actually went a step further and imagined if you could flip that page over and get just the data view. Here are the average age of the people who are reading this article. Here's the approximate cost per click revenue that we're getting, which would be crazy to put on an article, right? We wanted to be a little provocative there. But it looks really familiar, right? Doesn't this feel like Chartbeat? What's interesting is as we were building this, Chartbeat launched downtown. So I like that one. And then we started moving on into different ways of visualizing these audiences. Some of you might remember our Cascade project, which was looking at how social audiences and influence began to spread, how a single person saying something would change the day and change the information diet of hundreds, if not thousands, of other people. We started looking at different ways that people might comment. So here we're looking at inline highlights and commentary directly on our site, even in some semi-private places where you could annotate an article and send it to a friend, and only the people who had the right URL would be able to see the things that you wrote. We also started to think about different ways that we could remix these articles. How can we take them apart and pull them into different places? And so we built Compendium. This idea is almost like a Pinterest for news, where you can grab an article or an image or a quote and tell your own story, sort of on the backbone or the substrate of what the Times had to say. And then, I think as an industry, we started to get our handle on that. There are a lot of better tools out there. The newsroom got bought in. People are now, we have social media desks and social media editors who now think about these kinds of questions. And so we began to move on. Underlying all of those trends is this idea of data and sensing. We're surrounded by more and more things that can measure what we're doing. There are shirts that can measure our heart rate and our speed as we bicycle. We have Fitbits and heart rate monitors. We have Nest thermostats and other devices that go in our home and can see who's there and measure everything from ambient temperature to humidity. And so what can we do with that data as journalists? What might come next? We also saw the exact opposite of that things that used to be very physical suddenly had digital representations. You could rent cars online, you could go to school, you could share information, you could find a place to stay if you found yourself in a city and you didn't have a hotel room. This sort of digitization of the real world and lifting it up into the internet. And so we went around again and we did this sort of road show, as some of you who've been at the Times recognize that we do sometimes. And came out with this idea that the divide between what was physical and what was digital was very quickly eroding. We had a great tagline for this. It was that atoms are the new bits. And what we meant by that was that they are readable, that with machine vision and sensing, we can suddenly take information from the real world, almost like a storage medium. If you think of a room or a place as a hard drive, we can take that information and can compute with it. They're writable in that things that we do online can manifest themselves in physical ways. Everything from simple projections of data on buildings to objects that change their color or their presence with data that they find online. And that atoms were accessible, that we could very quickly create things taking things out of the digital world into the physical world with technologies like 3D printing and circuit printing that were just then coming to the fore. We thought this was a pretty key thing. And so in our work, we started to investigate these as well. What data can we get? What sensors can we create? And how can we visualize that? On the sensing side, we built a program here called Curriculum. This is a bit of code that goes into all of our browsers so that we can see the key topics that everyone in the lab is browsing about. This gives us sort of a sixth sense of the research agendas of all of our colleagues. And we made a lot of different ways to manifest that data in the real world. The screen on the left is sort of a browser-based version, what we call the Zen view. It sort of rotates every 10 seconds and gives you new topics. And on the right, we built a couple of little small screens that we embedded throughout the lab that showed the key ideas that were coming up that day so that we could manifest those things in physical space. We then went a little further and built a piece of furniture, this idea of computing getting broken out of the computing device and into the space around us. This table will listen to the conversation that hears around it, will transcribe that conversation, and will help the people at it take better notes. So if you hear something you want to remember, you can tap a touch-sensitive strip in the table, and it will grab that previous 30 seconds to the next 30 seconds of audio so that you can get that joke, you can get that to-do, all of it comes right back to you. And then we started thinking about how we can take some of those ideas and apply them to our own workflow. This is a prototype of a text editor that we wrote that will listen as a reporter is typing and will begin to highlight those key phrases that it thinks are structured data, whether they're names or places or topics that we might want to find later. So not just this article is about Hillary Clinton, but Hillary Clinton was mentioned in the 3rd, 7th, and 12th paragraphs. That might be important for later. We don't know what we would use it for necessarily, but we know that getting better structured data allows us to prototype more quickly. And then we wrestled with this idea that managing all of this data is actually really hard. There were no good tools for listening to streaming data, so we built one and we open sourced it. It's called Stream Tools. What it allows you to do is connect to any source of streaming data on the web. It will also turn static data into streams if you don't have that, or if the API that you're using is more basic. And then each of these gray blocks that you see in the view is another piece of logic that will either strip out some of the information that you don't need, or will combine it in a different way, or will add it together, or will build a graph. So you can very quickly start to consume and manage all of this data. And then finally, we started to look again at how we visualize that information now that we could look at it in real time. This is a recording of a video, this is a recording of a demonstration that we have running in our lab we call Delta. It is a real-time visualization of every single click that we have on the New York Times in that last few minutes. So if any of you have read the New York Times on the web in the last year or so, you've made a little pinprick appear on a screen somewhere in our lab. We visualize these in 2 different ways. You saw the globe at the beginning. That's just a simple geolocation so we can see where the traffic's coming from. This view here gives us an idea of how people are moving from page to page. So as we see transitions happening, we can map them so we can see you coming from the home page and going to an article, or jumping from article to article or section to section. So roughly, if I were to sort of chart out what the last 10 years looks like for us, we had this big long chunk of devices, then we started looking at social audiences, and then later at data and sensing. We're about to move into a new 4th thing, which I'll tell you at the end. I will notice here that my job is getting a lot harder. You can see those bars getting shorter and shorter. The world is changing much more quickly than when we started. So in a few moments, we'll tell you what's coming now. What I wanted to do, though, was to take a step back. I know I've been bragging now for a solid 20 minutes, and I appreciate that you've allowed me to do that. One of the things that I think has been most important about this process of coming through the last 10 years is figuring out what works and what doesn't. Often when I give talks like this, a lot of people at the end will come and ask me, like, can you come teach us how to do this? Can you come help us set up this kind of a community of practice within our organization? And you know what, the answer is yes, I'm gonna do it right now, you don't have to ask me later. So here's how we're gonna do this. How do you R&D? If this is something that's interesting to you, how do you get it started? We have the luxury of having a dedicated team and some space and some hardware. That's great. You don't necessarily need that. I think the key part of our process is really how you gather ideas and work with those signals. The first one that I think is the most important is scanning. What this means is to read and listen to as many different points of view, as many different sources as you possibly can. I mentioned at the top that each of our technologists has a very diverse background. That really means that each of us is thinking about a different problem space all the time. So I come from like a product management and a sort of more businessy background, and so I'm worried about business models, I'm worried about things like ad blocking. We have game designers who are worried about interaction. We have data scientists who are reading, academic papers on new algorithms. And each of us comes together every week with some of these ideas, and we can share them with each other and help explain them to each other. The reason that we do this is that if you've ever done any sort of futurism, there's this idea that, and pardon my language, but extrapolation is bullshit. It is a really easy job to take a data point that you had yesterday, look at that data point today, and draw a line 5 years out. That's the sort of thing that gets you projections on how many laser discs will sell in 2005. True story, there's a great chart, you should find it. What scanning allows us to do is to find those points of gravity that sit away from that line that we think will pull our trajectory in a different direction. And the way that we do this is actually really stupidly simple. We use Pinboard. Is anybody here familiar with Pinboard? A few of you are. It allows us to post links in such a way that we can share not just that this is an important idea, but also the tags that we think go along with it. So not only do we get a list of all the things we want to review, but we can also see on the side here, what are some of the things that are bubbling to the top? What are some of the things that we're getting a lot of signal about? And how do we work with that? There's a clue embedded here, by the way. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's scanning. Read as much as you can, record the links to the things that you think are interesting, and come back and read them again later. Once you've done that, the next key thing to do is what we call synthesis. That is, now that I have all these little data points, what do I do with them? You write them on Post-its. It's the secret of the whole thing. Not really. What we do is we write all these ideas down. So if we read an article about a new machine learning algorithm, we'll put that on a Post-it in as short and as clear a piece of language as we can. And we'll start to cluster those ideas together. These two things seem like they're pretty adjacent to each other in this space, or these two things are completely different from each other. They're happening at different angles. And what that allows us to do is actually three things. So if you imagine this is your wall, you can find clusters like this that say there seems to be a lot of activity that maybe these two people don't know about, but it feels very related in terms of what they're searching for. So maybe there's going to be something interesting that emerges out of this space. You can take one particular idea and start to draw out the possible implications of whether that idea comes to pass. There are lots of different frameworks for this. One of them is called STEEP. Stands for Societal, Technological, Economic, Environmental, and Political. So basically, if this thing happens, who benefits, who loses, what do they do in response, how do they work with that idea? And then finally, what happens when two or three of these very disparate ideas suddenly happen at the same time? Is there a fourth thing, for example, in this example, that will suddenly emerge because there's a new substrate that allows it? And this is really one of the more interesting ways to do that. So, synthesis, taking the ideas that you've found, taking the signals that you've heard, and trying to make some sense of them, either by clustering or by connection. And then finally, experimentation. This is the part that we don't often get to talk about when we do these talks, because as you saw from the beginning, a lot of the stuff we do is interesting and fun and shiny and often correct, thankfully. This is where we get a lot of it wrong, and we don't often like to talk about that part. But it's just as important to get the thing wrong as it is to get it right. This is a question that I get a lot of times when I give these talks. How are you allowed to do things that fail? Well, they don't fail. We learn from them, and that's just as important. I would rather take a person and put them on a project for 4 weeks and have them come back at the end of that 4 weeks and tell me, you know what, this thing isn't a thing. It's not ready yet. It doesn't work right. It's not right for us. It's not something we should do. As opposed to putting an entire team of people against a brand new product and having them come and launch a thing and then have to decide in public, oh, that wasn't actually a thing. You can save a lot of investment by playing a little bit. And some of the ways that we've played have helped lead to other ideas and helped learn more about the technologies. but they haven't necessarily turned themselves into demos or talks or other things like that. So here's some examples. Back in 2011, started working on a project called Bendy. What would happen if your e-reader or your device was flexible? Is there a new set of interactions that would come along with that? The answer is yes, but they're all really awkward and you don't have a flexible device yet. This one is called Blush. Could we make a wearable that is not just for the person who's wearing it, but is for the social environment that they find themselves in? The answer is yes. It's weird. People don't know what to do when the little light goes off, and so that starts a whole other conversation. But it was fun to learn about and speculate on. This one is my favorite. This one is called Locus. It had an internal code name called Brain Slug. I'm not kidding. What you see there is a piece of formed plastic, a battery and a microcontroller, and a resistive pad. The idea here was, is there a way that we could sense the presence of others in space or in time? So imagine that you are walking around a city you haven't been in, but some of your friends have. And so instead of looking on Foursquare, where are all the places that my friends have been? This just gets warm when you get to a place where a friend had been recently. Kind of a neat idea, right? Now here's a pop quiz. In what other environment, what other situation in your life do you feel heat on the back of your neck? What emotion do you associate with that?
Embarrassment.
Fear and shame, right. We made a shame generator. It didn't go very far. It did what it was supposed to do, though. Here's one. What happens when objects that collect data that have sensors start to talk? What kind of story would an object tell you? The answer is we don't know exactly, but they're kind of fun to think about. And what this let us do was, on the left, if you can read it, are the stories that the mug on the pedestal would say. The mug was associated with a temperature sensor. The blocks were associated with a proximity sensor, and the apple with a light sensor. And so each one would sort of tell stories based on how light or dark or how many people it saw. And we sort of imagined them having these not necessarily anthropomorphic, these sort of personalities that were related to the kind of thing that they wanted to do. The mug really wanted to just give you the right thing to drink, and so if it was warm, it would offer you something cool, and vice versa. The blocks really wanted to be stacked. And so whenever they saw somebody come, they got really excited and thought they might get moved around. It seems kind of weird and silly, and it was done sort of as an art project. It was released at the Future of Storytelling Conference in New York a couple of years ago. And the idea here was, we're going to start encountering intelligences that aren't our own. Whether it's objects or AI or bots or what have you, what does it feel like to talk to something that is not human? What does it feel like to have a conversation where anthropomorphization is exactly the wrong thing to do to fill that space? And so this helped us get into that. Not a lot of implications for the Times generally, but it was a fairly cheap project, and we're still learning from that one. So the point here is, as much as you can afford to, take some people, give them a little bit of time, and allow them to go off and do some fun work. And then finally, the fourth step is communication. You need to talk to a lot of people all the time. As a matter of fact, this is actually steps 1 through 4, is communication. And for our process, something that we've landed on is a pitch process. This is roughly an illustration of what it's like to build something from idea to prototype, where you start with that green dot in the center and sort of spiral your way out. We've landed on a process where if someone is interested in an idea, they will write it up, say, this is what I hope to learn, this is what I hope to accomplish, these are the kinds of tools I would need, and this is the help from my colleagues that I will need. We all get together as a team and help them refine that idea, and then either agree to work on it together or shelve it. Sometimes, even a good idea, it's not quite the right time to do yet. And what that allows us to do is to have that conversation where I've done a thing for 4 weeks, and then I can come back to the group and say, I think there's more to do, and this is what I want to do next, versus I've done it for 4 weeks, there's nothing left to learn, I'm going to write it up and put it away. And the entire process of that involves not just communication within our lab, but also within the rest of the company. If we think that there is a developer who's working on a project that could learn from something that we're pulling together, and we can accelerate that project, great, we'll go and have coffee with that person. We'll talk to the product leads and learn what their strategies are and learn what they're worried about for the next 6 to 12 months and see if there are ways that we can incorporate those questions into our research agenda. And we'll have ongoing conversations with all of our senior executives so that as they're thinking about where the company is going, they can understand some of what we think might be happening outside of our four walls so that they can incorporate that into the strategic goals of the company. All of that is pretty critical. So, told you a little bit about how. Why would you do this? Why would you hire a couple of extra people or take some time away from the people that you've already got to work on something that will probably not turn into a product or probably not turn into revenue? For us, there are a few different reasons why you might do that. And I think as you go into forming an innovation program like this, these should be top of mind. You should be really conscious about how you accomplish your goals. We have taken the last 10 years and figured out a lot of this along the way, where I really wish that somebody had told me this when I started. The first one is pretty easy, believe it or not, is the PR and the brand positioning part. The Times Innovates is an easy thing to say now because we have an R&D group, and that was really the focus of a lot of our work initially. This is great. It allows me to come here and talk to you. But it doesn't actually move the needle. It doesn't change internal culture, it doesn't make new products, it doesn't change people's views about the strategy of the company, because all of your speech is to other people outside. That gets us to where I like to apply a lot of our effort now, which is on internal thought leadership and consultation. This is very difficult. This requires you to be invited to the right meetings at the right times, or vice versa, to make sure that every other person in the company who might be thinking about something interesting knows what you already know. Now, the first is clearly much easier to do. You just want to be in the room. So when someone says, has anybody done anything with VR lately? Someone from your innovation team can actually say, we've done some things, this team has looked at this product and we've seen some other initiatives happening around and here's where we can move forward. If that meeting happens without you, whatever research you've done is still on your shelf and it's not being used in the right ways. So this requires a lot of not only buy-in from your executive leadership and from your masthead, but it also requires all of their people as well to know, to remember, to talk to you occasionally, to bring you into the right meetings and to have those conversations. And then finally, this is the one that I think a lot of people think of first when they think about R&D, that I'm going to have a group of people who are off completely separate from my product pipeline. But every now and then they're going to make something so amazing and so wonderful that we will have no choice but to sell it and make lots of money. That almost never happens. I hate to tell you that. It almost never happens. And that's for two reasons. One, even if it's a great idea, it has to be operated. And your R&D team is not going to be the group that operates it. It's going to be your existing technology and operations teams. And the last thing a good developer wants to be told is, here, this has been made for you. Run it. They want to know how it works. They want to know what it was like to build it, and they want to have that same spark of creativity that your innovation team got. So that conversation is a non-starter. The other reason that this rarely works is because, as you saw, we're experimenting with things that are not necessarily meant to turn into products. So if you try to shove like a demo into a product, you're going to suddenly realize that it's a lot harder to make something for everyone than it is to make it for one person. A lot of the stuff that we showed you here is very brittle. You'll come through our tour and we'll have to restart it before you show up. The code breaks a lot. Things fall over. We're not building products. And so if that's your goal, then you need a very different set of experiences, very different set of skills than some of the stuff that we've talked about here today. I think ultimately what you'll end up with is yet another product team. So think clearly about what it is you want to get out of your innovation group before you start them up, and think about how they interact with the rest of the company. So, I said at the beginning, I was going to leave you with a little bit of where we think things are heading. This one's a lot of fun. You may have already seen some of this come out in the world, but I wanted to give you sort of the high-level overview of it. We've seen quite a lot of light and heat lately around chat-based interfaces, about conversational UIs. This is a couple of screenshots from Facebook's M, which is built into its Facebook Messenger platform. It allows you to do everything from finding a place for dinner, to trying to get your Comcast bill lowered, to booking travel. And the way that they do this is that it's essentially what you might have heard in questions are answered by an AI. Sometimes it has to be forwarded to a person, but you never know which is responding to you at any given time. It's kind of an interesting interaction. We've also seen the rise naturally of everything from Siri and Cortana to Google Now to Amazon Echo. Sony announced one just yesterday that is basically an Echo crammed with cameras and other sensors. These virtual personal assistants are continuing to grow up, and again, they follow the same pattern. They're based on AI. They do their best. They're not great all the time. But what's interesting about this is that the conversations that you have with these devices are suddenly media. We've also seen that people are shifting from the more public spaces of Facebook and Twitter to much more private and semi-private places like Snapchat and Slack. So what does it mean to try to be a journalist when the people that are reading you are all talking with each other in a room that you're not necessarily invited to? How do you get inside that room? These things have been around for a while, but we see 4 areas, again, thinking about our scanning and synthesis areas, 4 areas that are leading directly into this. First is artificial intelligence. Computers are getting smarter and smarter, and algorithms are getting better and better. A lot of the work that we've seen recently, like Google's Deep Dream imagery, for example, was literally not possible a year ago. Scientists and computer scientists, data scientists, statisticians are constantly coming up with new ways of constructing these systems so that they can better understand our world and better read data from the physical planet. That is being fed by more and more sensors, data collection. These are 2 satellites that a group called Planet Labs is putting up. They anticipate being able to take a high-resolution photo down to a meter resolution every single day of every single meter on the entire planet. So just think about the kinds of stories you could write, right? Like, where are these people moving? Where is this forest going? You know, one of the examples that they showed us in one of their pieces of imagery, I'm not sure, is anybody in here familiar with oil storage? Probably not. I hope not, it's really boring. But the thing is, in oil tank, the ceiling floats on the level of oil. And so if you have satellite imagery of an oil field every single day, you suddenly have competitive information about the stockpile of oil that is in that place as that shadow changes, as the lid rises and falls. We've also seen a lot of movement in computer-assisted AI of conversational interfaces. Here on the left, it's Gmail is suggesting ways for you to start your email, which I'm sure you've seen. On the right, Microsoft is showing off some of its real-time translation, these sort of computer-mediated conversations. Computers are getting much more facile at talking to us. And then finally, this explosion, as I mentioned, of messaging platforms. Places where people are talking much as they talk to each other every day. It's just they're sort of chatting back and forth with each other. And again, these have been around forever. We had bots back in the AOL Instant Messaging days. You had IRC bots even before that, going all the way back to ELIZA. I mean, it's a classic computer science problem from the 50s and 60s. But it's in the union of all of these things that I think a brand new set of problems is about to emerge for us journalists. And how we solve that is going to be pretty challenging. So our posture to this is a little bit orthogonal, or a little bit against what the typical industry position here is. You might have heard the term smart systems. Yeah, they're not so smart. They make a lot of bad decisions. They lock you out of decision making. They give you the illusion of control when in fact you only get an A or B response. We would rather think about these as humble systems. These are systems that can support, that can augment, that can suggest, but that don't take away agency and try to deal with you as a human being with your own sets of interests and capabilities. So this is an area that we're going to be doing a lot of new research in, which I can basically sum up as this. Relationship design is the new user experience. We have to determine what it's like to have a relationship with a non-human intelligence. We have to understand the kinds of non-human intelligences we're creating. What are the aspects of them? Do they have personality? And if so, why? Do they have gender? And if so, why? What kinds of affordances do they allow the human to have, and why are they limited? All of those questions have to go into these systems that we design. So in the lab, we're looking at this across 3 different areas of research. The first is building these user interfaces themselves, playing with the tools that are available to us to better understand how conversation can be created and how intelligence can be built. We're going much deeper on understanding how neural networks work, how to build artificial intelligences off of data that we might have versus what the world has. Spoiler, it's really hard and expensive. And also this design idea, designing for interpretation, again, making sure that we leave room for the human to have some kind of interaction, that the bot is not taking over, the bot is not writing the story, the bot is not forcing your hand. It is providing you information and is offering you superpowers, is giving you new tools and techniques that you didn't have before. One area that you might have seen some of this work already, we are partnering with our interactive news team down in our newsroom to build an election bot that you can add to your own Slack. So if you happen to use Slack, I'd encourage you to go install it. It had a big hairy URL, so you can go there and get it. We will be doing quite a lot for Super Tuesday. I can't tell you exactly what yet because we're still putting the finishing touches on a couple of things, but if you happen to see this during the Iowa or New Hampshire primaries, I can tell you that it's going to be a very much more robust experience coming up on Tuesday, so take a look. I will hopefully have left some time for questions, so if anyone has any, I would love to hear them. You first.
Hi. So I have so many questions, but I'm going to pick one. I'm at CUNY, so I'm just
Okay.
what are your thoughts about this dilemma between you need to know the users to be able to serve them better, but the users are creeped at by people following them around and knowing them.
Mm-hmm.
So like this balance, what's your idea about how to strike the right balance?
Yeah, that is a really tough problem, and it's certainly one that we've been wrestling with. I've been working with a few of our technologists and our legal team on different responses to ad blocking, which is naturally coming from one of these concerns around how much of my own information as a reader is being stored and collected. I personally think that a lot of the data that we collect and store is unnecessary. I forget who said it, and I wish I looked it up, and I'll look it up after and I'll tweet it, remind me. There was this sort of Harvard Business Review style article that came out a while ago where the writer said that data is the new oil. It's this new natural resource that we can mine and we can refine and we can get stuff out of it. And someone about a year or two later wrote a response and said, no, data is the new debt. Every bit of information that you store is a liability. You could get hacked and someone could read it. You could use it in the wrong way and turn off your relationship with that reader or that user. Or even if none of those terrible things happen, you just have to store it. You have to pay Amazon or Google or someone to leave it on a server somewhere. And so what I've been trying to advocate for as we think about how to respond to a lot of these concerns is we need to be collecting what we absolutely need. We need to use it as quickly as possible. And we need to delete things much more actively than we currently do. If we no longer have a need for a piece of data, then we'll store that data in aggregate. I don't necessarily need to know that you read a particular story 2 years ago, but I would like to know how many people read it overall. So store the sum and not the data itself, if that's something that you're after. It's a tough problem though, and the systems that we have so far aren't really well designed to give us that kind of control.
My name's Kathy Hackle. I'm a Periscope influencer and a live streaming strategist. You talked about messaging apps, but how are you guys innovating when it comes to live streaming, all these live video, live streaming apps that are, kind of taking over social media, and also that component that's going to happen with the 360 video when it comes to live streaming? So.
For our part, we in R&D actually haven't been doing very much with live streaming and live video, partly because it all happened much more quickly than anybody anticipated, I think. that was definitely one of those areas, and I'll admit it in front of lots of people, that we don't always know everything. That was something that happened that we were unaware of, to be honest with you. And by the time it came, suddenly there was this groundswell from within the newsroom of the people who were actually covering the stories who wanted to use those tools in those ways. And so we just sort of got out of their way and said, by all means. As one example, about 2 years ago, we were studying, Oculus and some of the other 360 technologies that were out there. And I remember having a meeting with some of our SVPs about it, and they said, what do you think? And I said, well, it's great. It's a really interesting storytelling medium. There's a lot you can do with it. But until everybody has a headset, it's not going to go anywhere. Now, I would love to be able to trace the lineage of an idea as it goes from head to head, because I was never in the right meeting at the right time, as I mentioned before. But the thing that I think that we managed to solve, and not we, R&D, but we, the Times, managed to solve, was that distribution problem, where suddenly 1.1 million headsets were delivered all over the place, and suddenly VR became a much bigger force than it could have been before. That's something that we in R&D would never have considered. Like, we think about the outside world as the influence on us, and the fact that somebody downstairs, frankly it was Sam Dolnick, who's working in the newsroom as part of our sort of mobile innovation team, came up with the idea and went to our the editor of the magazine to try to get some support behind that. The fact that he had the idea of, why don't we just send them, was a stroke of genius, frankly. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Hi, I'll be speaking on the metrics and impact panel tomorrow, so 2 questions. Is that Delta tool that you showed publicly available, or is that a proprietary tool?
It's proprietary only because it relies a lot on our own structured data and what we have. The visualization itself is all running in Chrome, and so each of those objects is like an SVG object that gets translated, et cetera, for the coders in the room. And the back end is actually the Stream Tools pattern that you saw on the screen, where we're listening to click data as it comes through our queues and munging it through that way.
And then, how do you think about the impact of your experiments if they're not adopted? How do you measure that, and how do you sort of talk about it internally?
Well, that's really hard. Part of the impact that we do have is public, is PR, is sort of getting out there and showing people what we've done and encouraging the community to think a little bit differently about these problems. We also open source a lot of what we can open source. So Stream Tools, for example, is a great example of that. I encourage you all to use it. We have a new version coming out very soon. And that helps us grow some of that impact out in the community. Internally, it's one thing to be right, it's another to be right and heard. And so that, I think, is something that any group like ours continues to struggle with. You never know when the right conversation is the one that you should be in. So, okay. I have some time afterward. I know we're going to go on break, so thank you so much for having me back. I really enjoyed it, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
All right, glad you're back. We'll go ahead and get started a little early. I'm Stephen King. I'm a professor at the University of North Carolina. I'm the former director of innovations for the Washington Post, so Matt and I competed back in those early days that he went through. And so now I run a media innovation lab at UNC where we have some our great Knight partners have really helped us out, and so we'll be showing some of that. But today we're going to be talking about this emerging virtual reality. Everyone's talking about it. What is it? How do we tell stories in it? What does it mean for journalists? And then what does that mean for students, and how do we prepare people for this kind of emerging world that we're all trying to figure out as we go? So we were supposed to have 3 panelists, but you see one chair is missing. Dan Pacheco from Syracuse University is not able to join us because he had flight problems, but I do have some of the things that he wanted to show. He's doing a lot of work with students. He has classes where students are doing this hands-on, and he's got some stuff he wanted to show you guys of what students can do in 1 semester working with this. And then right here we have Dan Archer from Empathetic Media. Okay. Dan does a lot with CG, computer-generated virtual reality. We're going to talk about the different types of virtual reality, and he'll be talking about the kind of the virtual world of that. And then we have Joy Lee from Riot. They've been doing some really cool work that you might have seen on a lot of major media publications lately. And so she's going to talk a lot about kind of the future of 360 video. Okay. So before they get going, let's kind of define what is virtual reality, okay, and what the world thinks of virtual reality, and what does us as practitioners think of virtual reality. So virtual reality, virtual being a very important part of it, originally the idea is it's this created space. It's a world that doesn't really exist, okay? But now we have 360 video. Well, that is a real world, so is it virtual reality or is it real, okay? So here's what my thought, and you guys feel free to jump in if you disagree. The world sees 360 video and virtual reality, like the computer-generated version, as one. They don't know a difference because the device is the same. It's the same interface, the same similar way of consuming it, so they just say everything's virtual reality. So when I pull out my Samsung Gear VR, they see that as virtual reality. They don't know I'm watching 360 video in it because they can't even see it. And so it's kind of this just this understanding it's all VR. But as practitioners, I think we have to be a little bit smarter in how we talk about it, because if I just keep saying VR, 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 you don't know what I'm talking about. So I think there's a point where we want to have computer-generated or virtual experiences, and there's sometimes when we want the real experience. We want to take you there in a 360 video experience, and so we kind of have both. So do you guys have terms that you use? Dan, do you have a term you use for kind of what the kind of stuff you create?
Yeah, sure. Oh, is this on? Hello. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Pleasure to be here. I think for me, it's more about the experience itself. With computer-generated experiences, really the reason we are passionate about using them is the level of interaction is so much heightened. So I think that level of being able to have full navigational experience, so you can, obviously, instead of just the head-mounted, you're not static, you can physically move, you can interact with objects, and that facilitates a sort of a greater level of immersion when it comes to interacting with characters as well, and allows you to build on ideas of pathways. And so I tend to use computer-generated experiences and 360 video.
Yeah. So, interesting thing, we love the 360 video, but we can't move, right? We can't actually, the user doesn't get to control where they are in this space. Well, one of the issues we see with 360 video is when you stitch it, we've done great jobs with making it static and putting it there. For those who don't know, when you make 360 video, the current situation, the majority of them are multiple cameras being stitched together. Joy, is this you're using which rig do you want to say?
So we've experimented with a few different kinds, but generally we do use a GoPro rig. So sometimes it's 6 GoPros together, maybe sometimes it's 7, 8. We've also gone as far as 14. But now there's new cameras coming out every day almost, so now we also use the Pix Pro by the Kodak, and for the easier shoots we've also used a really mobile, extremely easy to use Theta 360 camera if anyone is familiar with that.
So there are lots of cameras coming out, and most recently Samsung has announced they have one that's built into that's integrated with the new Galaxy, what are we on, 7 or 8 now? 7, thank you. The Galaxy 7, and they're supposed to stitch it in the phone, which is kind of a really interesting concept as far as speed. Think about breaking news and what you can do with that. And the quality is getting better, it's getting easier. But right now, things are hard. You're working with 6 cameras, 8 cameras, you mentioned 14. I work with a 6-camera rig. I just got this new 2-camera that you're seeing here. This is a Kodak SP 360 4K. So it's 2 4K cameras with lenses on it. Makes things a little easier because there's only 2 cameras and not 6, right? And that makes things a little easier. But you have trade-offs with image quality and lens distortion and those kinds of things. And so kind of all of this is like emerging and changing. The Theta S that she mentioned, camera that's really kind of easy to use, very straightforward. I love it from a journalist-student perspective. You can get in the market for $350. You can start working with it. It's basically what the first cell phone cameras were for 360 video, right? It's putting the two together, and you're able to kind of do that. Now, for the record, we have seen a lot of bad ones. Matt, could you go to YouTube 360? Or youtube.com/360, and then there's a section in there about what was done at the latest caucuses in the Iowa caucus. There's some bad examples, and I'm going to actually start with a bad example here. So if you, there's one from NBC News, so if you stretch out that page a little bit, you'll get one more on the caucuses. Sorry. We're having technical problems, so I can't grab this myself, but there we go. Go to youtube.com/360. Oh, there it is. Thank you. And then, okay, click on this one right here, the NBC one. I'm so disappointed this came from NBC. Have you guys seen this? All right, this is 360 video, okay? Inside the campaign, all right? Come on, guys, rotate the camera, all right? And if you were listening to this, you would actually hear at the end, he goes, am I supposed to hit stop? Okay. All right.
Just when I'm done?
Yeah, that's what it says, yeah. So click stop when I'm done, right? Okay, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Now here's the crazy part. This got elevated by an editor to the front page or the front 360 page for YouTube. Okay, that's scary, okay? So what I want us to say is like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. We still want to think about good things, good quality. What's the focus? Like, learn the technology, experiment with it, and then like kind of put your storytelling piece to it, but make sure you kind of edit it.
Yeah, exactly. I think the idea of focus is really critical. And so one thing that we tend to let drive is the idea of, should this even be a VR piece? Like, do we need this technology to turn around and see that guy's face?
Right.
Like,
I think this is also shameless self-advertising, but if you guys want to see another 360 video of the Iowa caucus, we do have one on stage with Bernie Sanders.
Let's go ahead and do that. Can you go back to the Bernie Sanders one? It's on here. This one, you guys had great access. This is a really great position. You know, when you're looking at 360, you have fields of view that you want to work in, right? And so it is the second one, I think. Second row, second one. Yeah, right there. Okay. This is really nice because, I don't know, you can explain how you got the access. We let him watch it first. Okay. So Bernie, he's there, this is his acceptance speech, and it's right there on the stage with the crowd. So they kind of beat all the other news organizations because the Washington Post's, like in the Washington Post version, you can actually see their camera, and it's kind of like, oh, they got a better angle. So I guess we're having internet issues with this. Is that right? There we go. And then if you turn around, you can see how the crowd reacted.
This campaign is something that is very, very serious business. And what it is about is not just electing a president of the United States, as important as that is. It is
So this one takes us to a place that people can't get. You can't get on stage, right? So that's kind of nice. I think this is a great example. And so why don't you go ahead and start, if you want to go through your slides and kind of give them, tell them a little bit about what you're doing, kind of like how Riot works and kind of what projects you're working on.
Sure. Should I speak from here?
You can't because they got to drive it, so it's kind of however you want to. If you want to stand, you can. If you want to just sit there, that's fine.
I do like sitting in this chair. Okay, so I'm Joy. Thank you so much for the introduction. So I work at Riot, which is an immersive news media company, and a lot of what we've tried to do over the last few years is really drive home this idea that stories that we tell have to be stories that matter. We really have to be cognizant of the stories that we tell, and in order to do that also, we want to also kind of bridge a gap between any kind of empathy that these stories might generate, or any kind of desire for action that these stories might generate, and provide a clear path to concrete actions that the viewer can take. So I mean, if you go to our site, you can look at the bottom of every story that we publish. Oftentimes, there will be a little note that gives a little bit more information about the general issue at hand, and a link to an organization that does some great work in the area, a link to a donation page, or a link to a petition site, or even just a link where you can start digging deeper. And so something that we started experimenting with in the last, I guess, 9 months, so you can move on to the next slide. Right, so we've had, a few different verticals, right? We started off as Right News, but then, we also developed into a production company where we do short films and feature documentaries. And so then we thought, how can we advance the world of journalism and explore different venues and different mediums that can also contribute to storytelling? That's when VR came into play, and I guess this is funny because the discussion earlier, we've kind of interchangeably used the terms VR. You can even see, I don't know if you can read it, but it says Right VR. But really, yes, it is 360 video. We don't really experiment with computer-generated virtual reality. But up to date, I think we've had over 100 virtual reality films or 360-degree videos that we've produced. And a lot of those, you have seen a strange arc over the last 9 months as we continue to explore and continue to find ways that 360-degree videos can be really, really helpful. And I think the next slide, I'm going to show you a somewhat cheesy teaser reel that we have of some of our VR films. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep probably saying VR films.
Yeah, and I think that's
so
fine. Like, that's what the
cheesy.
consumers do. It's just VR. That's totally fine.
Yeah, but now you guys, you will understand that I'm talking about 360-degree video. So this is in Alaska from a piece where we talked about climate change. I think this is in Mongolia when we're following a family of Kazakh tribe. And this is in Paris. This is under the water with dolphins. This is a marine conservation piece we did. And then sometimes we do some weird entertainment stuff, like I think that's One Direction of all things. This is, just ignore that part. If I think correctly, this is India, this is in Kenya. We did a piece about education. This is when the Pope was in Rome. New York Times, or New York, again, Alaska, back in the climate change piece. This is in Aleppo, Syria. That's just a beautiful woman, I'm not really sure who she is. So, of course, generally we do really try to stick with stories that matter and are crucial. Sometimes we do screw around with more of the cultural fun things. And even, for example, the swimming under the water with dolphins, it's supposed to be about marine conservation and environmental rights, but again, it's a more fun way of diving into it, I would say.
Well, let's stay on that topic for a second. So one of the things that we like to do when we're building our films is we want to point to it, right? Like most of the work you do has a specific point, but you also want interest, right? It needs to be valuable.
Yes.
So I was talking to someone the other day, and I was like, we want to have a third sizzle, a third that's captivating, and then a third that starts to begin that narrative, and then that final third makes the point, right? And so we're building a story, but you can't just have a boring scene like a guy walking through the caucus. What value is that? But building that and kind of giving a sizzle. What are some of the things that you think are the most interesting pieces that have been done on 360 video?
So actually, of course, at a place like here where you have Frank and Journalism Interactive, we've had a lot of conversations lately about where virtual reality 360-degree videos are really applicable. And I definitely stand by this, that you really, really have to choose carefully where VR is necessary. I think you should always be thinking about how can it accentuate and further the story. But oddly enough, it does really boil down to, of course, I think the logic of storytelling is the same. You have to have some kind of narrative arc. You have to have some kind of really interesting pull through the story. But what really seems to work is you mentioned this earlier too, is about access, right? So the Bernie Sanders piece, I mean, none of our other pieces, we did an episode for every single day of the Iowa caucus, or the days leading up to it. And sure, they did all right, you know, they garnered some kind of attention, but the moment that we had this thing on stage with Bernie Sanders, it blew up. You know, it went everywhere. Huffington Post put it on their page. And I think it's a lot of these things where you can be transported to a place where you normally wouldn't have access to. So I've talked about other films, Welcome to Aleppo. I mean, obviously Syria is a place that the average person is clearly not going to go. You don't have the access there, it's too dangerous, and not only do you not physically have access there, a lot of times you're not having access to the images coming out of there as well. Same thing with the solitary confinement piece that we did. That for me is actually, I don't know if you guys heard me, I've talked about so many times now of how powerful that piece was, because it really tries to capture and emulate not only the physical experience of being in a confinement cell, but also the emotional experience of claustrophobia and this overwhelming sensation of this desire to leave and get out. And so in those moments, when it not only captures the physical environment, but the emotional sentiment, and also provides you an access to a place where you normally don't go, I think those are very key components to what make a good VR film.
I think if you're looking at your classroom, I think both of these films are really great. Here's how I used the Aleppo one. I didn't talk about 360 video, I wasn't talking about VR. I just came in and I said, hey guys, pull this up, take 10 minutes and just consume this, right? And they like got into it. And then afterwards, we had the discussion of like, how is that different than another film? How was that taking you to a place? How did you get to experience Aleppo in a way you hadn't before? And then they were all of a sudden really getting into, wow, what is the power of this medium and kind of where can we go? So that's a really great example to bring into the students. It's not about the tech, it's not about how they did it, it's about like, it's just a great story.
Yeah.
So while we're talking, get more on kind of what the work you guys are doing.
I mean, if you wanted to go for a question, we can go for that too.
So let's on the 360 video, let's talk a little bit about the kind of the emerging tech stuff. So here we had hoped to have 360 video streaming so that you could actually interact with your phone. We've hit the inevitable internet blockage here. It was working before, but anyway, what we have is a 2-camera setup that lets you navigate and consume it, and you're able to do it live. So people have done this for concerts, like YouTube has had concerts, lots of them have streamed it live, and typically that's been like a truck and a crew to do that. So at UNC, we're trying to create sustainable media products that people can use. So our idea was, how cheap can we get this and make this doable? So I talked to several publishers and editors to kind of figure out what that price point is and what they thought they could do it. And it was $5,000 or less. Okay, they can pretty much spend $5,000 and get away with it and kind of like experiment. So that was our goal. So this rig that you see here will do live 360 video streaming for $4,700. Okay, so it includes the software and kind of all of these different things. But this is like, you know, pretty it looks simplistic, but it took me weeks and weeks of like fine-tuning and prepping. We UNC want to give that to publishers and educators to be able to use and do it. So if you can come up with your $5,000 for this is a really nice thing that you can take and now do live streaming. So I have the how-to guide on my blog that kind of explains the whole process of that. And then I'll go ahead and go into one more piece of tech on 360 video. If you haven't shot it before, what you'll notice about when you use multiple cameras, stability is very important. So if you're flying on a drone, that drone has to be nice and smooth. Okay? If you're doing it in a car, you can't do it on a potholed road. Like, it's got to be smooth. You get this wobble effect and it doesn't stitch right. So if you think about how films do a nice trucking shot or a moving shot, you have to either do it on a cart, dolly system, some type of way of getting a nice smooth. You can do a Steadicam. Steadicams don't work on 360 because, again, you got the Steadicam operator like in the shot, right? So I was trying to solve this. So we were going to the Galapagos, and I wanted to do a slow moving shot kind of on the beach with the sea lions and kind of just like move through. And so started trying to solve this problem. And so I'm going to show you something. No one's seen it outside the lab, so this is the first time it's made its debut here. So hopefully you'll get to see it. So hang on one second, let's hope everything works here.
Wow.
Well, it's a little fast. So I can come and have this robot that does a nice, smooth follow. So we could have, if you wanted to have a reporter actually giving a presentation, they could actually do this. We're using this for tours. So at UNC they want to do this whole like student virtual tour thing. And so we're actually doing this where like the person's like doing the tour guide piece to this, right? But what's more valuable than necessarily the follow part is the actual ability for us to be able to hide as the filmmaker, get out of the shot, and actually do a nice slow moving shot with the remote control. So we can, microphone there. So we can kind of move the shot. And we've experimented with a couple of different stability things. We've had, we've basically put the like glide cams on here. We've done springs. This is version 2 of the robot, but version 12 of the stability piece of it, right? So it's kind of been this constant evolving thing, and you can see the video go from really shaky to smooth. And now when we weight this down, basically calibrated based on the weight of the camera, which rig we use, it gets pretty smooth, and you can get a nice slow moving shot with it. So this one is one, it's a, again, we're trying to keep it down and get the price down, but again, we're trying to we want to basically take live streaming and 360 video and put live streaming 360 video and the robot together, and then what could we use this as a storytelling tool, okay? So this is moving a little bit farther in the future, but we are using it now, and kind of just seeing what's out there, okay? This is kind of one of those things.
Right now?
What is it? It is not shooting right now. We could, like we probably should, just for fun. But it started out in my garage with my dad and I, and like we started building one, and then it was a prototype that was enough to like get people moving on. But I do want to tell you what we named it. So we're calling this Ducille. If you remember the late Michael Ducille, 3-time Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer who died covering Ebola in Liberia. Anyway, we call this Ducille because this is the camera, the 360 camera that will take us anywhere. And so in honor of him, that's what we're calling it Ducille. So this is just a new technology that's coming. It's not, obviously it's a prototype. It's made with like, I was in Home Depot building this kind of thing. So, but as we move forward, I think you'll kind of see this and that same range of trying to get it under $5,000 so it can be another tool for filmmakers. Okay. So, all right, enough of that kind of tech part. Let's move and talk a little bit about the CG created piece. So we got Dan here. Why don't you kind of give us a little intro to what you do?
Yeah, thank you very much. I feel like Ducille should be the third.
Yes, let's just put it up here.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm going to play devil's advocate, obviously, or as a, to foster a sense of conversation around this and like different approaches. I think one thing that this, for me, immediately calls into question is the idea of staging, particularly when you're covering live events. Like, and this is something, often I think we often fixate on the tech and the sort of the hows, and sometimes we should also consider like, obviously this new era of ethics around covering things like that, and how putting different rigs in locations where, you are putting people in the spot, how people might react to these thousands of dollars worth of equipment being sort of dropped into their villages or wherever they happen to be. So if I could call up the slide. Cool, so as I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about computer-generated storytelling. This is a screenshot from our latest piece. I'll talk about it in a little bit, but it's called I Survived. It gives you a sense of the sort of fidelity that we're approaching. And for me, obviously, I don't think a lot of people sort of immediately associate, oh, well, it has to be perfectly realistic, it has to be photorealistic in order to recreate that sense of reality. I happen to think that actually once you're inside this experience, and I'm curious actually, how many of you have tried CG-based experiences like, Nani LaPeña's work and stuff? Okay, so we see obviously a lot more penetration into the video 360 space, but for me, this area obviously is more interesting in the sense of what the narrative mechanics can allow you to do, and how you can incorporate that into your story. So I'm just going to give you some examples of our work and our workflow as well. So obviously, another show of hands, how many of you have tried the Vive? Okay, interesting. And how many of you have tried, obviously, Oculus? Okay, and everyone's tried cardboard, more or less, I assume. So yeah, so we, you know, at Empathetic Media, what we do is we produce these experiences, but I will say, and Joyce, this is picking up on Joy's point as well, we don't believe that VR is this journalistic silver bullet. When you're covering stories, it is very hard to try and condense an entire story, be it immersive or not, into 10 minutes. And sometimes, so often we think that taking a more sort of transmedia approach when you're incorporating different computer-generated experiences, be they augmented reality, virtual reality, or even, you know, good old just multimedia, you need to show some sort of context. Like VR is great at providing that visceral sense of presence, but that doesn't necessarily give you the backstory to be able to make sense of what you're seeing. So if we move to the next one. So I'm going to just touch briefly on some of the software that is freeware. So SketchUp, I'm not sure how many of you have looked into that. Google SketchUp, it's totally great for getting people, students into the VR, into the 3D space. It allows you, in the Pro version, there is a free version, to, as you can see with the Ferguson piece, I produced a piece called Ferguson First Hand, that I'm going to talk a bit about. But we use this as a way of sort of drafting a blueprint of what the experience would look like. It took screenshots from Google Earth, dropped them into SketchUp, and then we built the environment on top. So move to the next one. I'm going to rifle through this. So PhotoScan or 123D Catch by Autodesk. These are great, very casual ways of trying to create 3D objects. So my whole intention, Empathetic Media, what we're trying to do is really demystify this sense that you need to be, you know, Industrial Light and Magic with a Star Wars-esque budget to be able to produce this sort of tech. I think the reason this space is so interesting right now is that all the tools are so much more accessible. You know, obviously 10 years ago, a VR rig was like tens of thousands of dollars. Unity, the game engine that we predominantly work in, is free, as is Unreal. So we'll move to the next one. This is SketchUp again. I'm not a Google, I don't get commissioned from Google, other products are available. But you can see, so this is a way you can actually use photo reference inside SketchUp and you marry the perspective lines. I'm not sure if you can see the green lines here on this building. And it allows you to sketch and basically carve out 3D models using the photographs as a sort of, I guess, a crutch of sorts. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of you have also experimented with photospheres, you know. So these are just very casual ways. The Ricoh, the Theta, you know, does take good panoramic photos. And so sometimes, as I say, in a lot of these experiences that I've tried, the audio is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And so sometimes you don't need to do the video feed. You can just do a photograph and have very compelling audio. Okay. So I mentioned augmented reality. This is my time to do a bit of shilling. This is our augmented reality app, ARC. It basically allows you to... how many of you have used an augmented reality app? Okay. So the way it works, you can see on the second phone there, you essentially you download our amazing app, and then you find the trigger, and it can be print or digital, and you open the phone up and you use the phone's camera to scan the trigger, much like the beloved QR days of yore, and it brings up a 3D model inside your phone that you can then move around. So you can get contextual information if you click on the different UI buttons that you can see in the third screen there. And it just gives you a better sense of like a situation. You're not first person, you're third person, but you can still make sense spatially of stories. And these are some examples of work that's coming out. So we're doing a breakdown of Donald Trump's empire in collaboration with the Associated Press. We're doing the first AR story with the Washington Post covering the Freddie Gray trial. And so it's really, again, like I said, how can you make sense of that space inside the police van, for example? So, as I mentioned, Ferguson First Hand, this was our first, I guess, trial with the technology, done while I was a fellow at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I see some people in the crowd, MIZ. Thank you, great, I'm very enthusiastic, okay, brilliant. There you go, thank you very much. So yeah, I couldn't have done it without them. It was a steep learning curve, but obviously I started my fellowship and Michael Brown was fatally shot 10 days afterwards. So I went down to Ferguson, Missouri, and this was all from photo reference. And then we built the scene in Unity. So I'm going to just do a very quick video walkthrough. And hopefully we'll also have the rig, the Oculus set up later on for you to try. We were at Cafe Vaulted last night together with Riot. It was a good line. So essentially you're on the scene at the Canfield Green Apartments complex. Each of the different beacons represent different pieces of evidence. You can walk through, for example, the white beacons, and they bring up pieces of 3D models of, say, the shell casings. There are also comics that I originally started the experience of.
And black beacons will play audio with the eyewitness in the grand jury trial. The colored beacons are linked together chronologically by arrows and must be visited in the fixed order displayed. The black and white beacons can be visited at any time. All of these geographical locations are based on research and data gathered at the scene, though in some cases, witness beacons have been approximated.
So this was a great collaborative effort with my Convergence students. I couldn't have done it without them. And essentially what we did is we took the transcripts from the grand jury trial that came out, and then we used voice actors to voice them and put them in different scenes, different beacons, different positions around the scene. And as you walk into them, you can see where the respective models were in relation to where they were standing. So it gives you the idea is to use the mechanics of this virtual space to allow people to see that there isn't one truth, right? In many cases, all of the evidence is entirely contradictory. So it was that idea of user agency as making sense of news stories. Okay, thanks. And sorry, a few more. So we made a mobile version. As I said, we're really concerned about deployment and accessibility. So all of our pieces, that was on Oculus, but we made a mobile version. There was a little bit of controversy around its launch. I think that the nature of the storytelling and obviously the nature of the story itself meant that it courted a great deal of controversy from Apple and the Play Store. So
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think if you are able, when you do the experience, it is quite obvious the nature of the experience, right? In no way are we trying to, glamorize or focus on the violence or any issue like that. It's much more about the sort of the Rashomon-esque experience of these contradictory pieces of evidence and our own bias. And the feedback that we got from them was that this is too specific a topic and that it contravened some of the guidelines around inciting racial hatred to use Google Play's criteria.
What about all the shooter games that they
Right. I mean, yes. So that is an issue. As I said, I wrote this piece on Ars Technica and it kind of blew up, so I encourage you to check it out. So in terms of experience as well, the beauty of these 3D worlds is once you do build them, it's not just a coda that you add on the end, you can actually rebuild and update and create different experiences. So we made two different versions. One is this sandbox version, which is totally open world and free roaming, but some user feedback was like, it needs to be more guided. Part of our role as journalists is to curate the experience, so we made a guided version where you just click and you can move from beacon to beacon. So in terms of workflow, we use Fuse from Mixamo. I run countless workshops giving people sort of walkthroughs into this, but this is a scratch the surface kind of overview. It was recently bought by Adobe, and I think Dan Pacheco, the missing Dan Pacheco, will be giving a brilliant workshop and walkthrough of this tomorrow, so I encourage you to come along. So Fuse, Maya that was briefly. So the models are from Photo Reference, we produced them in Maya. Blender is a freeware, literally spelled like a fruit blender. And then Unity. And so this is the game engine that really I would encourage all journalism students to be trying to teach their students. There is, like I mentioned, it's very, very powerful. You can deploy to all sorts of different platforms. There's a huge, like Photoshop, you can use it for the tiniest thing as well as get really deep dive. It is a kind of a WYSIWYG interface, so I'm not a hard coder. It's based in C# and JavaScript, but you can just drag and drop. And there are countless plugins. And there's a really thriving ecosystem and sort of community around it. So we drop everything into Unity, and then that creates the experience. And so this is one of the key things that we really focus on, that we encourage everyone to really appreciate, is mobile deployment and optimization. And that's why I think this space is so exciting, because the phones, I mean, you look at where they were even a couple of years ago. Once depth cameras come on as standard, then we'll be able to literally 3D scan environments and drop them straight into our phones and use that real data. I'm pretty confident that's where this is going. And so now is the time. So talking about that seamlessly, we're working with Matterport as well, a 3D scanning company, and these are 3D scans of people and environments that we then are able to use. in producing these experiences. So it's not just a 2D photo reference that goes into a 3D piece. And then I'll just finish up by showing you some screenshots of our latest project. Like I mentioned, I started with the Colombia project. So it's about restorative justice in Colombia, but these are basically we took contradictory positions from a FARC guerrilla fighter and ex-paramilitary, and we recreate their testimonies in virtual reality. So it's all first person, this is inside the FARC camp, and you can pick up these objects and move around inside the space. And we have a Gear VR demo, and that's the first person perspective. So that was a whistle-stop tour. I haven't taken up too much time.
So a couple things I want to just kind of point out that he mentioned. One of those is kind of like the building process. So he starts like he does the research and everything, and he does a lot of photo collection, and then he builds those models, takes them into Maya and kind of builds that world. But then they go into Unity to kind of build that 3D moving space, and then that has what deploys to the different devices. One key thing he mentioned was like the different experience for the different devices. And this is a key thing that a lot of publishers are like, we just want a VR experience. They don't realize that the experience in the Oculus, the experience in the Gear, the experience in the Cardboard, that they're all very different experiences. And the idea that you could just build one for all, I think is a mistake. And I think we're doing that now, but we need to try to find ways like you did to make it for the device.
And I think one important point that we're all forgetting as well is VR can exist without the headset. So for a lot of people, the stumbling block is, I don't want to put something on my face, at least not something that's been on 40 people's faces before. So we do have wet wipes, it's fine. I think it's just as compelling, and we saw this to make, there isn't really a name for it, VR at arm's length or something, where it's the whole screen, it's not the split stereoscopic view, and you can move it around just using the accelerometer. That is enough to get people as well. In the same way that a lot of people also should be thinking about, Riot does it well on the YouTube 360 channel, like just having that, the ability to use the mouse click, and inside Facebook, like that is a key. You need to go to where people are. Obviously it's wonderful to have cardboards, but you still need to physically put them into people's hands. So I think that's the most casual experience, and that's also what people need to be thinking about. Like, do we make a Facebook teaser, and then it goes to a cardboard bigger version, and then the Oculus ground version?
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that 90% of our viewers probably watch our 360 through our Facebook page. Because Facebook released a 360 player, I guess it's been about 2 months now, a month and a half ago, and YouTube quite some time ago. So, I mean, also that just makes it so much more accessible to people who do not have access to cardboards or the Oculus.
So here's an interesting thing that's happening. So with Facebook doing it, YouTube's got it. The fact that Mark Zuckerberg was at the Samsung's Gear VR launch is a big deal, not because they're just like an Oculus partner, but like that they're actually saying like Facebook and Samsung are really partnering corporately, content-wise. All of these things are there. And I think that's a really big deal. And another point I'd like to make is that I've been like totally engrossed in 360 video for so long right now that I start trying to move regular videos. Okay? So like I'm on Facebook now, and a wide shot comes up, and I almost like move my mouse like I'm going to go move it. And so like just the obviously I'm having a lot more than most people because I'm in it to do this, but I think as we see people doing this, it's just going to become a natural part of storytelling.
Yes. Even those photos now though, if you just move the phone, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
They move if you just do it on Facebook.
Yeah.
So it's auto play.
Yeah, it just happens now, right? Like it's just becoming part of our technology.
It's actually really funny because I would say to this day still, so many of our 360 videos that go up on Facebook, I would say the majority of the comments that you see on each one is some random person that's saying, wow, this is crazy, and then tagging like 1 million friends, and that's still, you can still see it being so common even to this day, which is incredible.
Yeah.
People are more and more starting to realize what 360 is.
Yeah. So I'm going to say one more point, and then we'll open this up for questions. With 360 video, I think we're looking at the world of 360 video, and I don't know if my panel agrees with me on this, okay? But I think 360 video is a tool for storytelling that we have to figure out how it fits into longer narrative style. So if we know that the narrative video, we know from years of history of filmmaking and journalism and video, we know that we need visual variety. We need to go wide, medium, tight, back to wide, let you experience, move in, meet a character, come out from that character. There's all these things we do. We can't do that in 360 video right now. Now we can in the virtual world a little bit. So how do we bridge the two? And some people have created experiences that are trying to do this. And we're trying to build a player right now that will integrate 360 video and regular video together, so that you can actually switch between the two. But just thinking about this as, you know, kind of another form of storytelling that not everything has to be 360, right? Maybe 16:9, or what we're calling flat video, is the right thing. So.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to say this earlier and I totally forgot, but you know, I think there's also a lot of thinking that goes around 360 videos that it's almost a passive experience, especially in comparison to computer-generated virtual reality, where you have the ability to move around and interact with objects. But for me, 360 video, I actually see it as this huge tool of agency. So even if you can't move closer, you can't have, you know, close-ups and medium shots and wide shots in a very traditional sense, I think there's something very incredible about the fact that you can, for the first time really, I think in the tradition of filmmaking, be able to direct your gaze. Because I think in the past, you know, it is always the filmmaker, the DP, cinematographer, director who really chooses where your audience will direct their gaze. And I think this is an incredible, powerful tool in 360 video that really has to be thought about more deeply so that it can actually work well with the narrative structure. So, I mean, I think in an ideal world, I mean, in some 360 videos, the fact that you can choose where to look at any given time is going to really play into the story. So let's say if you look over here, you're going to see something incredible, but maybe right behind you, you're going to see something that contradicts it. And from there, you can develop your own sense of narrative. And another thing on top of that, sorry, one last thing, is that I think going back to the ethics question, I think it also creates a different or a deeper sense of accountability for the filmmaker. I mean, there's much less that you can hide in a 360-degree angle, and of course there's always going to be a level of curation from where you choose to place the 360 camera. But I do think it raises the stakes a little bit, and that, you know, you have to be much more accountable with what you're showing.
Yeah, in terms of the gaze, I think it's definitely, we need to think more about what is going to be, what the user experience is going to be, and raycasting, you know, using whether it's a little dot or, you know, a fake sort of straight ahead mechanism to associate where the viewer is looking and cue content up based on that, or whether audio is used as the cue. But I think we also need to tread carefully about not instilling viewer FOMO, in the sense of if you have multiple simultaneous action going on. I know that, I mean, I think it's really funny if you just look at, in user testing, you just record people's heads inside, you don't look at what they're watching, you just see whether they're twisting around like desperately, like, am I missing something, or you see people who have that wow experience and then look straight ahead. But I mean, I think it's so early days. Part of the work that I'm trying to do as well is look at if it does foster empathy, and so we're going to take different story experiences and track whether this does, you know, what is the optimum experience, and does it suit different narratives, and what approaches we take.
So let's open up to you. These guys are really smart. They've done this more than almost anybody else. Okay, so ask away. What kind of questions do you have?
What are the limitations on the narrative? How deep can you go? How I mean, we're talking about writing a magazine story that would be 1,500 or 2,000 words. Can that translate into this environment?
So I'll say, currently, when you talk about limitations, we found like an optimum use time is around 15 minutes. I'm not sure whether that's to do with latency or frame rates or just having something blinking on your eyes. People, you know, I think that's where everyone is hoping it'll go way further, you know, like, oh, I want to have a 2-hour full documentary experience. It's a lot of work for someone to be constantly thinking like, all right, now where am I supposed to be looking? And, you know, and I wouldn't say it's entirely relaxing. So that's why primarily, for example, we set up things like the augmented reality experience or comics around providing that contextual background. And I think that your point, Stephen, about having, you know, this part's going to be, this is going to give you the choice to dive deeper if you want. I think it's all about choice rather than a series of like forced.
And on the time thing, I think when the majority of your audience is using cardboard, it's far less. And I think it has to do with the fact that you're holding this like this. So the testing we've done, we've said that like 7 minutes is about as far as we're going to go. And you just add how much fall off you want. But, you know, the 5 to 7 minute for a Google Cardboard, now if we know they're going to be consuming an Oculus, we get much longer, or the Gear VR, you get longer. So.
I think it also depends on the audience as well. So the audience that Riot has is a fairly young audience. It goes from 16 to 30, the so-called millennials. And our testing shows actually on social media, it's maybe 3 to 4 or 5 minutes maximum. So we like to see it as short documentaries. And I would say, there's always going to be something that you miss out in terms of information, I think, from a short documentary film. But there's also a different kind of experience that you do gain from it.
Do you guys have any experience with people doing less than 360, like 180 experiences, where you don't necessarily want to look at the ceiling in here ever, or but that there's great information that can be a little more manageable, that still gets the excitement of that, but isn't like the standing constantly looking all around?
Yeah, completely. There are a lot of people, a lot of smart people have taken a lot of clever shortcuts. So I know that Ray Soto at Gannett, they did Harvest of Change, Dan was involved in that. I think it was called the ID camera, I think, and it kind of looks like a coffee grinder, and you sit it, and it does that wraparound cylinder, but it's just black at the top and bottom. And so some people have used that for advertising space. We haven't talked about that, but these experiences are ripe for having like a Splash logo or something like that brought to you by, etc. And I know that I think Riot as well as John have put stuff like that inside experiences.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, also, I don't know if you guys watched the CNN debate that happened. I can't even remember how. No, the one that happened maybe about 2 or 3 months ago, where they live broadcasted in 360. Actually, the back of it was, blacked out, and they did put a logo there. But I mean, for Riot as well, sometimes we do black out some parts of it if only we really want to direct your attention to a specific spot in the narrative.
I think it's a little distracting to be in an immersive world and all of a sudden you hit the end of the world, right? And so I think we break immersion. So if you're looking at it on your Facebook, and you just got the phone out, it's not as big a deal. But when you're in that world and all of a sudden you're looking and then you hit that 180 spot, I think that's different. What I think we need to do is it's a technology fix to actually make this available, is we need to be able to control the player and make the player know at this exact moment it's going to switch to 180 and then they can't go any farther, right? And that we can actually control the field of view. And so we're not far from that.
And we've also seen people stitching photos into it as well to save render weight on the phone. So some people have done that, like parts that, like the back, for example, where typically people might not spend much of the time looking, you can just stick a spherical photo.
One more question.
So implicit in this idea of empathy being generated in these environments is that empathy will lead to action. And you're actually more tied into giving people direct actions. Does it seem like these technologies actually have different outcomes than other forms, or is it too early to say?
Well, I mean, okay, well, very quickly on the Riot side, of course we haven't done any studies on it, right? So it's very hard to have evidence at this point whether it actually directs people to action. I would say that just some personal experience, it definitely seems that people feel so much more compelled to actually do something after they watch a VR piece. And if we track the data from our website, you can see that some of the VR pieces have led to more significant amount of clicks on our action button, but it's also hard to tell what happens after they click on the action button, whether they actually went through with whatever the action was. So I think for us it's a little too early to tell.
And yeah, as I've said at Frank and as well, I mean, I'm starting this Tau Fellowship to precisely chart both empathy through VR, but also behavioural change and what that might look like, whether it is clicking a button or following up, a finite time period afterwards. I would say that it definitely fosters a sense of curiosity in that sense of what have I just experienced. And so if you do go even into it cold, then there's still part of you that's like, that was so visceral, like I need to truly sort of understand. So I feel like that is something we can definitely build.
So, encouragement here, jump in. I think 360 video is kind of the easiest to kind of jump in and start working in. If you have any motion graphics artists and 3D artists that are in your school and you have things like that, starting to incorporate that. They're already playing in this world, and so it's probably something that they're really interested in working with you on. we're happy to kind of talk and answer questions. Right now we've got Mark Pepsel, right?
Right.
Okay, Mark Pepsel's going to come and he's got an activity for us to kind of help us integrate a little bit. So.
Yeah, I wish I could say we're more active. I'm going to demo something that my computer science department at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville helped me build, and it's really just in a very basic introductory stage. It took us a year to make it. But what I'm talking about is alternate reality games as a pedagogical tool. And you should know that there's already been some good research on this. If you find Shared Chess and Paul Booth's article in New Media and Society 2014, they talk about what alternate reality can be good for in a teaching environment. And it's good for social learning, fostering social learning, teaching students how to fail fast and iterate, and also developing new media literacies. And so here was my original dream. I wanted to set the building on fire. This is a building where I teach. It's mostly dominated by elevator shafts. And so I thought it'd be kind of cool for my students who were coming out of a conceptual theoretical class as freshmen to start to develop a little bit of journalistic skill. And we're going to build it into an iPad app because they all had iPads based on monies from a different project. I'm at a second-tier school in a second-tier system in a bankrupt state. Thanks for laughing. So here's what I did. There's a call that goes out every semester by the computer science department that says, who needs something coded or built? And they got me these 3 guys to build me an iOS app. These 3 guys are all community college graduates who have gone on to make a lot more than I make right now, and they're starting gigs, and they built me an app that does a few things. It's a QR code reader. It has a trivia function. There's a camera app, so it shoots, and then they can write slogans, and has a video recorder and editor, and it has a news reader with a built-in word processor. So what are these key features for in this minimum viable product? The idea is this is an Amazing Race application. So students are going to try to race through and get through different taskings, and every time they complete a task to my satisfaction or the satisfaction of the other participating professors, they are shown the QR code, and that's just, if you're familiar with the TV show, with the reality show, that's just the hurdle, the ticket to get you to the next level. So the QR codes come up when people complete things to the satisfaction of somebody who has knowledge. The benefits of this, let me tell you specifically what they did. The trivia questions were in there just to space people out. Some would do them very quickly. For others, it would take them 10 minutes, and that way we got people sort of on a more individual track to go through the other stages. They had to set up and shoot sort of a promotional photo with a slogan, like they were shooting for maybe a still photo magazine ad or still photo digital ad. They had to video record an interview with a public information officer, which was a Confederate, it was our department chair, dressed as a police officer, and edit down a soundbite, select a soundbite, which is not something freshman students in a theory class had a lot of experience doing. So again, this is taking people who had thought about all these concepts and actually make them practice them. So some benefits, the heightened stakes of doing this, I think made it great for students to be able to focus. This was a big portion of their final exam, but not the entire final exam. The app did everything that I asked. It delivered everything on the back end through, it was an encrypted delivery so that I was able to grade students' work and nobody else was able to access it. This was a nice PR boost. If you want to talk about branding or brand, well, let's say brand introduction, not so much curation. People need to become aware of our school in the region a little more. And it was truly interdisciplinary. Obviously, this was a computer science student project guided by the Mass Comm department for Mass Comm students, journalism students. But we also involved the theater department in getting some costumes ready. So it was hitting on several cylinders in that respect. I know this is basic. I know this is not 360. This is one guy and 3 college seniors working on their senior project with minimal guidance from the comp sci department chair getting this thing going. They spent a semester planning it, they spent a semester building it. It was only ready in time for the final exam. That's why we didn't do multiple games. I can talk about what I would like to see done in the future, but here's basically what gives me fits about it, the downside, if you will. Freshmen plus a new application means they're gonna break it. They're gonna find a way to break it. The individual test taking doesn't enable the sort of social group work that an alternate reality game can be really great for. So if I had to do it again, I would do a lot of group work games in the class session and then maybe make the final individual. And the manual uploads, we didn't have time or energy, honestly, and these guys were really awesome to work with me to build this, but to get this thing through Apple's many hoops, we decided not to do it. We just manually uploaded to the student iPads, 25 of them, and we did it 4 times. And every time we did it, everybody had to bring their iPads in. And there's always that guy, like, oh man, I left my iPad in my dorm. Can you run and get it? Yeah, okay, he brings it in at the end of class. Oh man, it's not charged. So, just say maybe. That's my message. Do I have time? Do I have another minute?
Yes.
All right, cool. Well, I don't have a demo, but I have some ideas that I wrote down in terms of why would you do this? Like, what's the point? Like, great, cool, you made a little thing you can demo to us. The controlled game scenario lets you isolate certain skills. It lets you put students into an environment where you know the parameters, where you know the limits of what they can do, and you can tell them what you expect. And yeah, it's a lot like the Choose Your Own Adventure game that I did as an undergrad at Mizzou, where you had to basically pick from several options for questions to ask inside of a little game scenario. And based on the questions you asked, you would get a different soundbite. And that was supposed to teach you, like, oh, your questions guide the way the interview goes. And it really was a choose your own adventure kind of experience. The Amazing Race scenario is a little bit more open, but you can still control the parameters. Students get great feedback, they get immediate feedback, but in terms of what I wish I had done better, now that the app is built, I want to use it more often in class, I want to use it for more group work, and I want the game itself to have more of a narrative other than just, let's race through this thing and get all these tasks done, because you can guess what happens when students are participating in something called a race. They just try to get done as fast as they can. So if you're looking at people who who are working on introductory skills, just basically getting the basic concept of framing up a photo and writing a slogan or cut line, or students who are just learning how to pick out a soundbite. If you want to focus simultaneously on quality and on getting all these tasks done, it's a good idea not to call it a race. Because at least in terms of the photo shoot, I bought a pack of Matchbox cars because my kid loves Matchbox cars. And if there's a product that I want people to photograph that I'm going to take home later, it might as well be something that my kid enjoys, right? Many of them just set one car up on the background, took a photo, and ran to the next thing. And I was saying, no, you were supposed to, in my head, they were going to do what my son does, which is crash them or build little scenarios. And I'm like, why are they not as good at this as a 4-year-old? And it's because they were in test mode, they were in race mode. Okay, so I think with more time and with more group work, they would get the hang of it and we could do a lot more. But this was just done the week before finals. So it was the final exam for the comp sci students to finish it, and then it was part of my final exam, like I said, a week later. Thank you.
All right, so we're happy to answer questions and do whatever you need us to do. We're happy to help. Dan is going, not this Dan, other Dan, Dan Pacheco, is going to be doing a workshop tomorrow on 360 video, and so if you come to that, you should be able to learn how to do this, how to do the stitching, and actually get a 360 video done and see some of the gear. So right before lunch, I'll take this out to the road if you guys want to see how the robot works and see it. You're welcome to come do that. But thank you guys, appreciate your help.
Remember your lunch cards are page 12. Grab a friend, grab a lunch, and we'll see you back at 1 o'clock.
That's just a cool difference.